Welcome to Coffee with Chris. Before we dive into it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Our guest today is copywriter, video script writer, website content creator, and ghostwriter, and most recently, a semi-finalist in a screenwriting competition, Paul Fenn. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I really appreciate your time. Now, Paul, talk to me about your career path here. How did you get into copywriting and now you're screenwriting with website content creation? I mean, you're doing so much creative stuff. Where was the starting point for you?
Boredom, I would have to say. I was let's see, where to really start. I was 28 years old, selling office furniture systems in Don Mills to the 905 district, which is Mississauga, Brampton, Bramalea, here in Toronto. This is back in the late 80s. I'm 63 now. And I saved up $100,000 and decided to quit and go traveling. And I traveled the world for 5 years. That's how long that money lasted. And when I began traveling, just as I was leaving my job, this lovely Russian woman, who I'd never met a Russian before her, handed me a going away present, which was, I think I still have it somewhere. Here it is. Yeah, this diary. And inside it, she wrote, I don't know if you can see it, above the Fiji bitter sticker, do, see, write.
Wow. And
I thought, what a goddamn great idea. I'm going to start writing about everything I do, because I bought a one-way ticket to Western Samoa and South Pacific. I had no idea what to expect. I was alone. I was budget traveling. And, you know, the notion of sitting down with the diary and the beer at the end of the day was very appealing. So I just got into that habit, started sending a lot of letters and postcards. I always photocopied every letter I sent before I sent it, so I would have a record of all the exploits. And so I did that for 5 years, and I was not a good writer, really, at all. And I still may not be. It depends who you talk to, but I loved doing it. It was very therapeutic. It cleared the head, put you in a good mood, made you laugh at yourself, not take yourself too seriously, because you'd go through your diary and see all the stupid things you've done and near-death experiences and embarrassing moments with women and so forth. And so it was humbling and yet uplifting, I guess. And then when the money ran out, I was in Singapore. Well, I was actually in Jakarta, which is a terrible place to run out of money because nobody believes you're poor. And I was living with an exceedingly drunk American gentleman. He was, sorry, I have a cat here. She may be noisy. And I just couldn't take it. I had to escape. So I went to Singapore on my Visa card, which I had never used in the 5 years I'd been traveling. So I had a clear Visa card with a nice fat credit line. Went to Singapore, knew one Canadian there, struggled for a year varnishing yacht exteriors under the equatorial sun, and then met someone at a party who said, "You're funny, you should be a copywriter." And I said, "How?" And he gave me a name and a number. He owned a graphic design firm who was doing quite well. He was a British guy, a young Brit in Singapore. And there were a lot of fun, interesting expatriates there at that time. This is mid-90s, 94, thereabouts, 93, 94. And he, I phoned this number, and long story short, I ended up writing copy for the hottest ad agency in Singapore a few weeks later, just because some other Brit took pity on me and thought, well, he's 34, so he's not, a 19-year-old greenhorn coming in here. Maybe he has something useful to say. And I had sold a few travel stories, and a few journalistic pieces to local men's and women's magazines.
Wow,
which was quite fun because they let you do whatever you wanted, and they never changed a word.
that's really cool.
Yeah, that was how it started. And then I set up a sole proprietorship and had a whole bunch of my own clients, and spent the next 6 years writing copy in Singapore for ad agencies, graphic designers, and my own clients.
So how do you go from copywriting to script writing or ghost writing? I mean, when you sit down and tell the Paul Fenn story for a script, for example, we get Paul Fenn's words, your imagination, your creativity. But your ghostwriting services, you're trying to interpret somebody else's creative point and somebody else's characterization. How does that, do you put yourself in their shoe? Do you add Paul Fenn to their writing as well? How does that creative experience work?
Um, well, as a copywriter, you're a ghostwriter when you think about it. You're writing on behalf of someone else to get their message across. So I had a lot of time training in that regard in all these years. So when I finally got hired to do ghostwriting and biographical writing, I knew what questions to ask, I suppose, in the briefing process. For example, what tone and manner do you want for this?
Okay.
Do you want it funny? Do you want it a confessional, self-deprecating memoir? Are you looking to change the world? Are you, conceited, humble? Did you survive the impossible? Right now, I'm in a dance with a person from Afghanistan who wants to tell her story, and it's a pretty jarring story, as you can imagine, growing up amidst the Taliban and all the civil war and whatnot. It's a hell of a story, and I don't know if it'll come to pass, but that to me will be one of the more interesting challenges I've had, because I have to become a female Afghan person as the ghost writer of this book,
Right.
and make it believable that I am that person, and also make it something people would want to buy. Sorry, my computer came unplugged. So yeah, does that answer that?
Absolutely. Now, when you're an accomplished screenwriter, those are my words. But when we look
Thanks.
at your screenwriting, where do you get your premise from? Where do you get your ideas from? Are you walking through, the grocery store and you say, hey, here's a tomato, let's do a story about a tomato? How does Paul Fenn get from start to finish with his incubating process of stories?
The very first idea I ever had for a screenplay came to me while I was walking down the street in Bangkok in about 1989. I had done some sailing, and really wanted to get back into it, and was just thinking about sailboats a lot. And this thought came into my head. Imagine if you were an 18-year-old boy living in LA with a highly dysfunctional family whose father owned a sailboat, and you decided to steal the boat and somehow were able to steal a bunch of his money as well and go see the world. And that was the idea I had for my very first one. And it took me about 26 years to write it. I literally started that thing in 1996 because I took a screenwriting course in Singapore, and I wrote 60 pages. It was actually an hour-long drama course. And I said, I don't have an hour-long drama. I have a full movie. And she said, all right, do 60 pages of your movie then. So, and she was a Hollywood writer who had been hired by the Singapore Broadcasting Corporation to come over and train locals or expats to write on all of these locally produced shows that were being made. And so I did the 60 pages, and she said it was okay. It wasn't great, but it was not a bad first go. I didn't have screenwriting software in those days, so you had to use Word and just space it and try to make it look like screenplay format. And it was quite laborious and prone to mistakes, but I set that thing aside, took another jump into it maybe around 2002, abandoned that, then jumped back into it about 2 years ago or even a year ago. No, I think it was when my mom was dying in 2019, to not go insane while watching my mom die in front of me. I was writing screenplays, and I decided to finish that mofo once and for all. And it was lousy. It was terrible. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. I'd read one or two books, but until you guys, Joe and the crew came along, I guess you'll have to elaborate on that. But until I got into a writers group, shall we say, I didn't know how to make it better, or if it was good, or how bad it was, until I got the full earful on that from our mutual mentor, Joe.
So when we look at these, well, first of all, with that screenplay, I'm happy that you had the outlet of creativity while you were going through something traumatic. I'm sorry that happened, but at the same time, you now have this beautiful creative story. What was the story called?
It had a bunch of names. The latest one is Blue Larceny.
Okay. And is this something that's been tabled and shelved? Are you still working on it from time to time, or just kind of moving on?
Oh, were you not there for that table read?
Nope.
Oh God, it was hilarious. We had to stop partway through because it was just so packed with exposition and repetitive sea descriptions, sea state descriptions, and boat gear descriptions. It was just terrible. And so Joe said, "Look, you got so much other stuff on the go. Let's just set that aside and work on these other two or three that we've been talking about." And that's where it is. It's there. I'd love to come back to it because I do think it's a hell of a good story. It just needs to be rendered right.
Do you think it might be a better fit for a novel as opposed to a screenplay if you have a lot of exposition? And for those, and let's, Paul, I'm going to have you describe it. If some people say, I don't know in screenwriting terms what you mean by exposition. What is that? Can you explain that to us?
No. Well, it's saying instead of showing, which is the cardinal sin of screenwriting, as far as I've been able to
too many
fathom.
details almost. It's we don't need to know that the lights are a blue hue unless it affects the story. So when we
it's
look
not
at
just that, it could be the character saying, he's just gone through something, and then he tells that same thing he's just gone through to someone else. Well, you don't need to see that again as the viewer or reader of that script. It's redundant. So there was a lot of that kind of thing in there.
So with that being your first one, now when we look at other projects that you've done, now you entered in one of your plays and you became a semi-finalist in that competition. What was that screenplay about?
There've been two where I reached the semis, I think, or quarters. I always get them mixed up, but one was called Mexican Overdrive, which is one we're working right now with our group. And it's a 1-hour pilot about an American diplomat who nearly gets killed in the field and decides to quit, only to discover he cannot do so for various reasons and must now once again serve Uncle Sam, but in a very different capacity as a motorcyclist masquerading as a tourist in Mexico with two others in a sort of Mod Squadian MacGyver-like setup. It's quite a lot of fun. There's going to be some blowing up of things and there's some serious autocratic far right skullduggery in play there that these guys are going to mess with. I don't want to give too much away, but that was one. I started that one many years ago before I moved into this house, which was nearly 7 years ago. So I've been in and out, but and then I abandoned it again. And I just kept coming back because it was the only thing that really gave me pleasure as a writer to try a screenplay, because it's so challenging. You're boxed in, you've got a format you must stick to, you've got a limited amount of time, you have to be pithy in your executions of every word. So it was appealing in that way. It keeps the pencil sharp, if nothing else. The second one, the most recent one that did okay in the semis or quarters was the horror movie that we've been reading called Desdemona.
Okay.
Did you get a taste of that?
Yeah,
I
no,
can't.
that was a fun one.
Yeah, that one. I think it's got potential. It needs a little rewriting, but original story takes place in Indonesia, involving supernatural matters of an extremely dark and folklore based nature. So people who live out that way will recognize a lot of what's going on. It's not the sort of Catholic possession trip that we're used to in our horror movies here. It's a Buddhist ghost, a Zen Buddhist ghost.
So when we look at some of the comments you've made, 20 years, 7 years, things like this, why does it take so long to get 80 pages, 100 pages, 300 pages? Why does that process take years to make a script?
Well, it probably doesn't if you're not me,
Fair enough.
right? My cat just agreed. Uh, well, because first of all, if you're not in a writers group, and a good one, which I believe I am in and you are in, how can you really know? As you may have heard, when you enter a script into a contest and you ask for notes, it depends who reads your script, what kind of mood they're in, what experience they have, how much they're being paid, how many they've read that day. All of these things factor into how they're going to react to your script. So if they read 10 pages and say, I'm just not into this, you're out. You're out of the contest. First read. Even though you may have written something fantastic that the guy sitting next to them or one of the other readers might have loved and bumped you up to the next level. So there's that in play. What was the question again?
Just when we look at script writing, sometimes people don't really understand what goes into it. And, some things take 2 years or 3 years, 26
right.
years. And I guess the idea is that we're trying to get it as close to perfect as we can. And a lot of people just don't get it. And I'm just wondering if you can describe in your words why it takes sometimes 20 years or 3 years to make that script ready for film. And as you mentioned with contests, you're right. Sometimes the person reading that script that day is in a bad mood and didn't like it. So how do you keep going? How do you keep that motivation alive to be creative and keep pushing forward?
Well, first of all, being creative is, I don't think it's all that hard. You just have to keep writing and it'll come to you. If you haven't been writing for long, that may take longer. But if you write all the time and you've been doing it for years, and I'm one of the fortunates who doesn't have writer's block. I don't think I've ever really suffered from that. I just keep going, and yeah, it'll be terrible for a while, but then you'll see where you want to be with it, and you'll find that stream of consciousness getting fed in that guides you and keeps you on track. As to why it takes so long, what I was getting at before when I lost track of my thoughts was you don't know who to trust. You may not trust yourself if you're new to it. And then if you've entered, as I have, several contests with the same screenplay and received completely conflicting notes, now what do you do?
Right.
So there's that. But then when you get in with a writer's group, you still have conflicting notes, as you've no doubt seen in the table reads we do, where you'll get, one person's take is this is too self-indulgent, and another person's is it's too much exposition, and another person's is who is this guy? I don't know him. I'm not buying him yet. So you're just pulling your hair out going, where do I even start? And that's why we have a mentor named Joe who can wade through all of that and just say one thing at a time. First of all, let's start with that note, which I agree with. That one I don't think is important yet, so we'll set it aside, but we might come back to it later. So you just kind of tick off your list the biggest things first until you get to something that's close to workable, and then you start fine tuning, I guess. I mean, that's how I've been doing it. I don't know how the pros and the long standing Hollywood employed writers do it, but I think everyone does it differently.
So when we look at screenwriting and premises, is there a genre that you're more drawn to than another? Do you prefer writing drama over horror or comedy over thriller?
Not really. So far, I've done, feature adventure. I've done 1 hour TV adventure, political kind of intrigue. I've done 3 horrors features. I just did I guess you'd call it a half-hour dramedy. I hate that word, but I wanted to do a sitcom, but I'm not funny enough, so it's sort of a comedy drama. And that'll be coming up in our group fairly soon, I think, perhaps even next week. I think it's next week I'm reading again, but so I like trying different things. Horror is fun for me though, because I never liked horror generally because it wasn't very good. And I thought, what if you tried to make good horror, or elevated horror as they call it now? There are a few examples of it, but not that many. And I don't think I've reached the point where I could call what I've done elevated horror. But one I'm working on now that you guys haven't really had a taste of, it's dark horror comedy, kind of over the top, schlocky, a bit Mars Attacks, but takes place on well, I don't even want to say, takes place at sea, shall we say. I do like a sea story. They seem to factor in somewhat.
Now, is there a piece of advice or even a saying that you wish someone would have told you when you first started this writing journey? Hey, Paul, do this. It's going to save you a bunch of time. Or, hey, look at this instead of that. Is there something that you just wish someone would have said, Paul, come on, man, do this? What would that have been?
Oh, many. Let's start with stay in school, then stay in sales, then don't quit your job and blow all your money, then don't become a writer, then if you're going to write, you got to write all the time and read all the hard books and do a lot of thinking and walking. And I didn't really do any of those things. I've just stumbled along in my own way. And, I'm not a big celebrity in my advertising world by any means. I just got lucky enough to not die of starvation yet. But, for young writers getting into it, I had a 19-year-old guy call me the other day. He said, I'm finished school. I want to be a writer. I saw your website. It's nicely written. What should I do? And I honestly didn't know what to tell him. I said, look, you realize you're entering this field at a time when AI threatens to knock us all off our perches. And he said, he actually set my mind at rest. He said, don't worry about that. I've been working with GPT, whatever it is, for 5 years. It only got released to the public recently, but it's been out there for 5 years. And coders like me, he's a smart kid, have been playing with it for a long time. And don't worry, there's no threat there. All that's going to do is knock out the lowest level copywriters, the people who write Facebook and Google ads, that kind of thing. The rest of us are going to be well ensconced for a long time to come. So that was nice to hear from someone 19 years old. I hope he's right.
Fair enough. Well, I have time for one last question for you, Paul. What makes Paul Fenn smile?
Oh, people slipping on ice, cars losing control, my wife, my daughter, my cat. In terms of entertainment, lots of different things. What have I been laughing? I don't laugh out loud all that often. I probably should. Does that answer your question?
It does. No, it does. And your website is paulfenn.com or .ca?
.com. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Paul, that's all the time I have for you today. I really appreciate your time and being here. Check out Paul Fenn at paulfenn.com for all your writing services needs, or even just questions about what he found funny today and what makes him laugh.
Thanks for having me.
This has been Coffee with Chris. Have a fantastic day, everybody, and smile to inspire. Thank you.